In this video, I'll be sharing with you a simple tutorial on how to cut and sew this simple palazzo jumpsuit. To start, I'll be making this dress with 3 yards of fabric. I'll start by cutting the trouser part of this dress. Now to fold, you need your hip measurement divided by 4. My hip is 40 divided by 4, which will give me 10. Now I'll add 2.5 inches extra to this, which is my front crotch extension, and to get that is your hip circumference divided by 16, which will make it a total of 12.5. Then I'll add 1 inch for ease on the dress and 1 inch for sewing allowance. So that is how I got the 14.5 inches. Now at the front part of my trouser, I'll start by marking my front crotch extension. But before marking that, go ahead to place your tape at the waist. Measure your full trouser length for the jumpsuit. Now my full trouser length is 40 inches, right? And I'll go ahead to add extra 2 inches to it for folding allowance. I'll place my tape and I'm going to mark my waist to hip point. I'm using 8 inches for the hip point, and then I'll mark my crotch. Now to get your crotch, sit on a flat surface, measure from your waist to where your butt meets on that flat surface. So this is a jumpsuit and you don't want to use the exact crotch you use for your trouser measurement, and you know this is a palazzo jumpsuit that is free. So I added extra 1.5 inches to my actual crotch, making it a total measurement of 12.5 inches, right? So I'll just go ahead to label as hip and my crotch for this trouser. Now you're going to mark your front crotch extension, and to get your front crotch extension is your hip circumference divided by 16. Now what I have is 2.5. I'm going to mark this starting from the waist to the hip point and to the crotch line. That line, I'll place my tape and mark 1.5. Now I'll connect it all the way, drawing out my crotch. So this is what I have here. Now on the waistline, I'm going to mark my waist circumference divided by 4. This is a free trouser. I'll add extra 1.5 inches to it, and then I'll add 1 inch for the stitching up allowance for my trouser, and I'll mark. Now I'll go ahead to start connecting it to the lower part of my pattern. To make sure I have an exact measurement, I'll place my tape, mark my hip circumference divided by 4, add extra 1 inch for sewing allowance and 1 inch for ease at the hip point of my pattern. After that, I'll connect from the waist to that point. Now let's go ahead to cut out my pattern before I'll go ahead to readjust the upper part of this trouser. So I'm just using this measurement I have here, and I'll trace it all the way down and also cut this out. After that, I'll go ahead to come down by half and I'll slant this all the way to the waistline of this pattern. So after I'm done marking that, I'll just go ahead to cut this out. So this is what I have, and I'll go ahead to trace out the sides of this trouser and then cut this part open. After cutting this, I'll use this to cut that of the back pattern of this dress. So what I did was to add my fabric, fold it into 2. At the upper part, I'll mark 1.5 inches above. This is for the butt allowance of my trouser. Now I'll mark 2 inches at the front part of the crotch for the back trouser, and I'll go ahead to connect this all the way to the lower part. Now while connecting at this point, I'll extend this by 2 inches and I'll connect. After I'm done connecting, I'm just going to go ahead to mark the actual waistline I have on my trouser, and then I'll place it this way, slant it down towards the waistline. That is, if you have 11 inches, make sure that the slanted line you're marking is that same 11 inches, and I'll go ahead to mark. Now after I'm done marking, I will mark where the hip point is. I will note that, then connect that point all the way to the hip point of that of the back, right? So when you're marking this, you want to be careful. If not, you might end up having an excess by the side of the hip of the back trouser. So now I'm just going to go ahead to connect from the upper part, and I'll mark 1/2 inch all the way down. Now if you don't want to use this ½ inch, you can just use the full wideness of this trouser, but I don't like the back side of my trouser popping out at the front part, so that's why I marked this ½ inch. So after that, I'll go ahead to cut this out. Now after cutting this out, I'll go ahead to cut out the upper part of this trouser. So here, go ahead to like chop out the excess you also have at the side of your pattern and cut it open, right? I'll keep this aside. Now let's work on the upper part. My shoulder to waist is 17 inches and I'll add additional ½ inch to it and I'll mark. Now I'll go ahead to pin this down. I'll place my ruler at that point and I'll go ahead to draw out a straight line. Now after marking that, I'll go ahead and mark my shoulder divided by 2 plus half. Come down by 1 inch there, mark a basic neckline of 3 inches and I'll go ahead to connect. The next step is to place my tape. I'll mark my shoulder to bust line, shoulder to under bust line, then shoulder to waistline, which is 17 inches. And I'll place my ruler to draw out a straight line on those parts. After that, I added an additional joining allowance of ½ inch, right? I'll mark my chest line. This is my bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches, and I will rule a straight line at that point. Now I'm going to place my tape and I'll mark my shoulder divided by 2 plus ½ inch because we are going to stitch up the sides of the armhole, and I'll go ahead to connect. So here I'm going to determine the depth of the neckline I want to use. So I just marked 7.5 and placed my ruler, and I'll go ahead to connect at this point. Now after connecting, I'm going to divide my armhole into 2 equal parts, come out by ½ inch. Here I'll mark my bust circumference divided by 4, connect this and also connect this at this point. Now this is what I have, and I'll just go ahead to outline my pattern, shoulder to bust, under bust and waistline. Now let's insert my measurement. I'll mark my bust circumference divided by 4, add 1.5 inches for sewing allowance, and then add 1 inch for the ease. I don't want the bust area to be too big, so that's why I'm just using 1 inch for ease, right? Now after marking that, the under bust, I'll first of all mark my dart. I'll mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2, which is 7 inches divided by 2. I have 3.5 inches. I'll place my ruler and connect. Now after I'm done marking this, I'm just going to mark ½ inch on both sides of my pattern. Come down by 1 inch at the bust, and I'm going to place my ruler to connect this all the way to the upper part of my pattern, and I will also connect to the other side. Now I'll mark my bust circumference divided by 4, measure the dart intake, replace, and I will go ahead to add ease to my pattern and also my sewing allowance, just the same way I did to the bust. I'll mark my waist circumference divided by 4, measure this dart intake, I'll replace it, then add my sewing allowance plus my ease. So when I was marking this, on the upper part, I marked 1 inch for ease for the waistline. So while for the waist of the trouser, I added extra 1.5 inches. So when I was actually joining it, I had an excess of ½ inch, which I went ahead to like trace out. So I actually forgot I used 1.5 inches for the ease of the trouser. Now you want to add ½ inch all the way around because you'll be cutting out this pattern. And I'll go ahead to trace it out. Now already on the armhole, I've added ½ inch when I was cutting out the shoulder because I did the shoulder divided by 2 plus ½ inch. Now I'll just go ahead to trace out the rest of my pattern. Now I'll use this pattern to cut out the back pattern of my dress. So now I'll place my pattern on a fabric and I'll draw out a straight line in front of it this way, and I'll extend it all the way up. Please make sure you pin your pattern before doing this. Now for my zipper allowance, I'll be using 1.5 inches and I'll go ahead to mark it all the way up and I'll extend. I'll go ahead to take out my zipper bulge by marking ½ inch here, and I'll place my ruler and I'll extend this all the way up to the upper part of my pattern. Now I'm going to go ahead to cut out my pattern. I'm going to go ahead to cut out the side. Now The lower part, I'll chop out that part that is not among the 1/2 inch and then trace out the neckline. I'll be using a neckline of 3 by 1 inch for the back. After cutting out, what I'll do is that point I have the dart intake, I'll go ahead to notch it. So that way it will be easier for me to identify the dart. I'll just measure the length of the dart, which is 7 inches. So while stitching, I'll use that notch and then sew a dart intake that is 7 inches long. Now I've cut out the lining and I'll go ahead to place it on it and I'll pin it down. So I'm going to stitch the side with 1/2 inch, the armhole, the neckline, the armhole of the other side and the side with 1/2 inch and keep this aside. Now for this part, I'll go ahead to open it up and place the lining on it. Now to stitch, I'm going to join with 1/2 inch at the zipper side, 1/2 inch at the neckline. I will leave the armhole open and stitch the side. Repeat the same process for this side also. For my trouser pattern, I'll go ahead to unpin it. Now I'll just go ahead to stitch this side with 1/2 inch, that is the crotch area. I'll go ahead to mark 1/2 inch and I'll stitch this all the way to the lower part. For the back pattern also, I'll repeat the same process. Now I'm done stitching and this is what I have. Just go ahead and notch this round and turn it to the right side. I'll also repeat this for the front part of my pattern. So I'm just marking that part that I have that notch, measure about 7 inches, and I'll be stitching my dart. So I'll also repeat this for the front. I'll go ahead to notch it and also notch the sides, and I'll go ahead to turn it to the right side also. Now this is what I have, and I'll flip this to the wrong side, that is the lining part, and I'll go ahead to mark that 7.5 inches, mark where I have the dart at both sides, and also repeat it on this side of my pattern. Now I'll go ahead to stitch up the dart for this back and also repeat it on the other side. Time to join the shoulder. I'll open up the shoulder of the back, place the shoulder of the front inside this way, and I'll go ahead to use my pin to secure it, right? And I'll pin to the end of the shoulder of the front, right? So what I'll do is I'll flip the front side inside of the back side of the dress this way. Now after flipping it in, what I'll now do is I'll go ahead to stitch the shoulder with 1/2 inch and stitch the remaining 1/2 inch of the back armhole, and I'll go ahead to notch it and then turn it from the other side. I'll also repeat this for the two sides of the shoulder, and after stitching, this is what I have. Now it's time to join the front part of the trouser to the front part of the upper part of the dress. Now what I'll do is to bring the front part of this dress, place it this way. Before joining, I'm going to go ahead to fold it into two and notch. This will enable me get the center point, and I will notch the notched part to the center and go ahead to pin the sides of your trouser. Now you'll be joining this with 1/2 inch. After pinning, I'm just going to join this with 1/2 inch. Now let's go ahead to join the back pattern. Now for the back trouser, I stitched this all the way up. I'll just go ahead to open it up. Open it at least 8 to 10 inches so that in case you have a bigger butt, it can sit very well, right? Now I'll bring that back and I'm going to place it this way, and I'm going to go ahead to stitch on it, right? Now if you notice, for the back pattern, I'll be having a little excess by the side. Just like I said, when I was cutting the upper part, I added ease of 1 inch. Now for the lower part of this pattern, I added 1.5, so that is why I have that little excess. So I'll just go ahead to trim it off. It didn't really affect the jumpsuit because it's actually a free jumpsuit. Also go ahead to join the other side, and what I'll do is just to trim this off a little. So I'll be trimming for the both sides, just very little, just for it to match up. You're not meant to trim much, right? I'll stitch this up with 1/2 inch. So I also cut out a little belt. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead to turn it, like stitch it up and attach it to the front part. Now I'm done stitching and this is what I have. So I went ahead to like place my fabric and I will pin it down. So what I'm going to do now is to mark out. So I added 1.5 inches for stitching allowance. After turning with the lining, I have 1 inch left. I'll mark. Now for the waistline of this trouser, I added 1.5 inches and I will mark that 1.5. That is towards the trouser part. Now you see this part of the trouser that has like a slight hip. Please go ahead to like try to avoid it. Do not mark your exact measurement, just follow it slightly straight. Now right, when you're going all the way to the lower part, I'm just going to go ahead to mark ½ inch all the way going down to the lower part of this trouser. So after doing that, I'll also fold out the lower part and I'll repeat the same process at the other side of the trouser or the jumpsuit. Now I'm done stitching, and what I'm going to do is just to stitch this up with ½ inch at the inner part of it, and I'll attach a zipper at the side at the back of the trouser. While adding my zip, I'll use ½ inch here. While going up, I'll extend it to about 1 inch at the upper part. So after I was done stitching, this is the final look of the jumpsuit. So if you find this video very interesting and educative, please kindly hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and also leave your comment at the comment section.